To begin with this morning, the commander of the air station would like to add his greetings to you. And by way of short introduction, let me tell you a little bit about Keith Hoskins, Captain, United States Navy, call sign Judge. He's from Parkville, Missouri, and he's got a degree in electrical engineering technology, got his wings in 1992. He's a Hornet guy. He's a Hornet pilot through and through, combat time. He was with the Blue Angel team from 1999 to 2001. He's got some 3,500 hours of flight time, but what I want you to know about him is he is a heck of a leader, he is a personal friend, and he's got the perfect voice for a microphone. So without further ado, here's Keith Hoskins.
General Thiessen, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Naval Air Station Pensacola, the cradle of naval aviation. You know, I take great pride in having the opportunity to be the commanding officer of this magnificent, very aesthetically pleasing base, so that we can host wonderful events such as the Symposium 15. So again, welcome to Naval Air Station Pensacola. I just want to say real quick that last year we had the honor of celebrating 100 years of this base. As most of you know, this base opened in November of 1914, and for 100 years last year we captured all of the many accomplishments of Naval Air Station Pensacola. Today, if you look around at NAS Pensacola, at Corey Station, at Softley Field, or other adjacent bases that I'm responsible for, you can see that we have grown tremendously in our ability to train the warfighter as they go out to the pointy end of the spear to protect this great land of ours. We have covered many different domains in intelligence, computer training, all of the aviation technical training, so we have grown considerably to be the centerpiece of training that provide all of the training for the Navy, the Air Force, the Marine Corps, the Army, and the Coast Guard here on board NAS Pensacola. As a culmination of many of the successes over the 100 of years, but in particularly for last year and part of this year, I'm happy to tell you that Naval Air Station Pensacola was selected as the Chief of Naval Installations Command Large Installation of the Year. That is the best base in the entire world. Thank you. And we continue to take on the challenges of present day and into the future so that we can continue to support naval aviation and all the things associated with naval aviation and the other enterprises that we train here on board NAS Pensacola. Again, I want to welcome you to the best Naval Air Station in the entire world. Enjoy the weather, enjoy the week, and thank you, and God bless.
The first panel of Symposium 15, as you see on the screen, is Air War Vietnam. And we want to bring those panelists up here, please, and have them sit at the table, but I want to introduce the moderator. The moderator is Admiral Lewis, Frederick Lewis. His call sign is Bad Fred. And I spent some time trying to figure out how he got that call sign, and I ran into a gentleman here named Carlton Lavender. Carlton Lavender, I asked him, okay, where did he get Bad Fred? And he kind of chuckled and he says, well, it's a story, but I can't tell you in public. So we're not going to go there. So, Admiral Lewis is an Academy grad. He became a naval aviator in 1963, and he started out flying 1962, bum gouge. He started out flying Phantoms, and later he flew F-14 Tomcats. His experience in aviation spans the Atlantic, spans the Pacific, includes test pilot school, includes the initial efforts to make the F-14 a combat community. It includes tours in Vietnam, so he's perfect for this forum and this board. He was the Carrier Air Wing commander when we shot down the two Libyan fighters in the Gulf of Sidra way back when, and all the signs went up, America 2, Libya 0. It was a great time in our history, and we needed that at that time. He's got over 6,500 hours and over 1,200 arrested landings. So without further ado, Admiral Lewis, the moderator for the first panel.
General Thiessen, Drano, thank you for the introduction. And I would be remiss before we began here if I didn't recognize somebody in the audience whom I am very fond of. And I would call him a good friend, but he's a good friend to the Navy, and for years has been a great friend to Naval Aviation. You'll hear more about him tonight at the banquet if you attend the banquet tonight. He's a guest speaker. And that's our former Secretary of the Navy, the former DepSecDef, Gordon England. Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being here, sir. Well, it's a great honor and privilege to be back here amongst you and here at our museum to moderate another symposium panel. And I want to especially thank Colonel Deej Kiley, who strong-armed me into coming back and got me back here and convinced me to return. But I'm really thrilled to be back here in this august chamber among all these beautiful artifacts, and delighted to be able to re-engage with old friends here in Pensacola, and I'm especially humbled to be here on the dais and to share it with some of the greatest heroes of naval aviation, from whom you'll hear in just a moment or two. Our purpose here this morning is really it's an oral history session, or lesson, if you will, with warriors who were prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice in conflict that occurred over 40 years ago. Half a world away in the skies over Vietnam. Many of you here in the audience share the same experiences, some of the same experiences that these gentlemen have seen, and you'll hear about their experiences from them in a moment or two. And in fact, some of you in the audience are probably as well qualified as these, who I selected to be part of this panel. But I chose these five. I chose these five great men because I have close personal knowledge of their exploits in combat, and I'm well aware of the sacrifices they've made for our nation, both in war and in peace. So now let's baseline the level of experience in our audience as far as the Vietnam War is concerned. Will all those who fought for our nation in Vietnam please rise? A round of applause. We honor your service, each and every one of you. And for all those who were prisoners of war, would you please rise here in the audience? Thank you for your sacrifice, sir. Well, by some accounts, the war in Vietnam began in 1955 with the fall of a place called Dien Bien Phu, and ended with the fall of Saigon in 1975. Others have cited that the Vietnam War for us really began with the Maddox and Turner Joy incident in 1964, and that it ended in 1973 with the repatriation of our prisoners of war. For most of us, however, it lasted for the days, the weeks, the months when we operated in the Gulf of Tonkin, or from bases like Da Nang and Chu Lai, flying combat missions against an elusive enemy who was equipped with a sophisticated air defense system and was supported by other players whom we were forbidden to strike. For 441 naval aviators who lost their lives or are still missing, the Vietnam War will last for all eternity. Included in that number of personnel losses were 67 commanding officers, executive officers, and air wing commanders who were leading from the front. The high price we paid for that war 42 years ago can be measured by those personnel losses, but also by the 530 Navy aircraft and for the Marine Corps, 193 fixed-wing aircraft and 270 helicopters that were lost in combat. Included in that number of Navy and Marine fixed-wing combat losses were the following by type aircraft. You may have flown some of these. A-1 Sky Raider, 48. A-3 Sky Warrior, 2. A-4 Skyhawk, 276. A-6 Intruder, 76. A-7s, 55. F-4 Phantoms, 147. F-8 Crusaders, 78. RA-5C Vigilantes, 18. RF-8s, 20. The combined total of all Navy and Marine fixed-wing combat and operational losses in the Vietnam theater was an incredible 1,068 strike fighter aircraft. The men on this panel not only survived that conflict, they thrived and excelled in the crucible that was the air war over Vietnam. In short, they are warriors who raced to the sound of cannon and excelled in our profession of arms. Now, let me offer a brief introduction to each panelist, and I commend to you their bios as listed in the program. I've asked each of them to give a retrospective of some of the missions that are singular in their minds in terms of their Vietnam War experience. And at the conclusion of the presentations, I hope we'll have time to get into a Q&A session. That is, of course, that the panelists observe the ROE Rules of Engagement dictum that I laid out to them earlier today, and I told them they had 12 minutes to talk. I'll caution them if they exceed that time, but if they go over that, they'll be severely punished. They'll be denied golf privileges for a week. Okay, introductions. To start with, my classmate, the United States Naval Academy, 1962, Admiral Leighton Smith. Snuffy has over 4,000 hours. He has 1,035 traps. He commanded the America Cargo 6, 282 combat missions. He wears 2 DFCs, 29 air medals, 4 strike flight air medals. And for his service as the Commander-in-Chief, Naval Forces Europe, and Commander, Allied Forces Southern Europe, when he commanded NATO forces during the bombing campaign in the former Yugoslavia, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth. He is one of the very few Americans to ever receive this great honor. Ladies and gentlemen, Snuffy Smith, Admiral Snuffy Smith.
Thank you very much.
Next, Admiral Bruce Bremner, my dear friend and the godfather for both of our children. Flight time, 8,900 hours, 5,000 hours, over 5,000 hours in the A6, 1,002 traps. He commanded Coral Sea, 190 combat missions, 2 Silver Stars, 3 DFCs. He's credited with the loss of 2 A6s in combat, and he crashed his crop duster 3 times, for which, that 5, my children call him Uncle Ace. Next is, please welcome Admiral Bruce Bremner, everyone. Next, Commander T.R. Schwartz. Flight time, 5,200, 1,000 carrier arrested landings. He commanded VF-161. 300 combat sorties. He wears a Silver Star, 6 DFCs. And in 1967, while flying his A-4 over Kep Airfield in North Vietnam, he shot down a MiG-17 with Zuni rockets off of his A-4. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Commander T.R. Schwartz. The tactical recce mission is it's unsung in today's world because we rely almost exclusively on overhead imagery. But in the 60s, somebody had to fly over Indian country to take the pictures. To take the pictures of prospective targets or to get the BDA from a strike previously. And the guys who flew the airplanes, they either flew the RF-8, the RF-4, or the RA-5C Vigilante. And Frank flew the Vigilante. Alone and unafraid, that's where Frank was with the Vigi at 600 knots at 500 feet, taking pictures that we used later on to plan our strikes and execute the missions. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Captain Frank Hamrick. And last but not least, the Marine rep on our panel, and that's Colonel John Cummings, Little John as he's affectionately known. Flight time over 7,500 hours, 4,500 hours in the F-4 Phantom. He flew 526 combat missions. He wears the Silver Star, the DFC, and 38 Air Medals. Little John enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1955. Stayed in the Marine Corps and rose from private to colonel, and when he retired from the United States Marine Corps, please welcome Colonel Little John Cummings. We'll start now with the presentations from our panelists, and we'll start with Admiral Smith, and then at the end we'll wrap up with Admiral Smith, who will kind of try to capture for you some of the lessons learned by these great Americans during combat that they may have applied to their future activities and as they became more senior in the Navy and were in positions as key decision makers. So let me turn the microphone over now to Snuffy.
Thank you very much, Ben. It's a pleasure to be down here and to talk about this. You can't start talking about the air war in Vietnam without prefacing by saying we did some pretty damn stupid things. Our tactics were bad, our weaponeering was poor, our target selection sucked, and the political influence that we had on us on a day-to-day basis was just an unbelievable mess. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. In about 1968 or 9, I believe it was McNamara was saying we did not have a shortage of weapons. There was a complaint on the front lines that we didn't have enough bombs. Most of you probably never heard of an AGM-45 Shrike missile. That's an anti-radiation missile. It's used against operating SAM sites. When they're transmitting and they've locked onto an airplane, you shoot this missile. It's supposed to go down, hit the radar, and destroy the radar, thus making the SAM ineffective. There was a period of time in North Vietnam, in Gulf of Tonkin, where there was one Shrike missile between three carrier air wings. We would literally take off from one carrier on the last cycle of the day, fly that Shrike missile around. When that mission was over, that pilot would land on another carrier, turn that missile over to that carrier, they would fly it through their cycle, and they would swap that Shrike missile around. Until one day, a young lieutenant on board I think it was the Ranger, made the mistake of shooting that missile. And I remember the chief of staff chewing him out, saying, "Do you realize what you've done?" And the guy looks at him and said, "Sir, do not send me into combat with a weapon and tell me I can't use it." And that was, I like that. However, the result of that was we didn't have any more Shrike missiles. So we actually would go up and we would shoot 5-inch Zuni rockets. And anytime you shot a Shrike missile, you would transmit shotgun. That would let everybody know that, okay, here comes a missile going out. And sometimes it was literally over the head of the strike group. Well, we would go up and shoot Zuni missiles and yell shotgun and hope that they'd turn off the system thinking it was a missile coming at them. Our tactics were stupid. When I first went to Vietnam in 1967, we would go in at about 2,500 feet because the SAM missiles at that, the SA-2 missiles at that time were thought to be absolutely deadly and we couldn't defeat them. So if they fired a missile, you went down low. And you'd literally get down 50 feet, hugging the earth as close as you could, and watch the SAMs go by. Well, when you get down low, you start getting shot at with small arms fire. So the results were we lost a lot more airplanes due to small arms fire than we did to the missiles. So over time, we started building back up. But the worst part of going in at 2,500 feet, flying a gutless A-4 Charlie with a little old J-65 engine, carrying a half a dozen 500-pound bombs, was you couldn't climb. So you're trying to get to a target, and your rolling altitude is 8,000 to 9,000 feet. You roll in at 45-degree angle. You acquire the target. You're supposed to achieve 450 knots at about 4,500 feet, which you never did. You drop the bombs, and you're out about 3,500 feet, which you never were. So bottom line is we couldn't hit our ass with both hands. At the end of the day, we changed the tactics, so we started going in high. We would go in high, 12, 13, 14,000 feet. We learned that we could defeat the missiles if we could see them. We also had electronic countermeasures at the time. So that was a much easier way to do it. You keep the speed up, you go in, you roll in, and by the time the third trip I made to Vietnam, we had computerized weapons capabilities, and we were going, we used to say, we'd brag and say, well, now we're going for, we could drop 6 bombs and we could actually hit a target, whereas before you could have dropped 24 bombs and you could be lucky if you hit the ground. We had a mission called the Rice Bag Mission. There was a ship anchored off of Vinh. Now, we were not allowed to attack any other vessels or any ships, only the designated targets. And they were being designated right out of the White House. So we were not able to hit the targets that really counted. There was a ship anchored off of Vinh. We couldn't take out the ship, and there was no dock in Vinh, so they would wrap these bags of rice in plastic and throw them off the side of the ship on an incoming tide, and the bags would float ashore. And we were challenged to go over and actually shoot the bags of rice with our 20-millimeter guns on the airplanes. Of course, this was in a surface-to-air missile envelope. Well, that doesn't make any difference. So I actually rolled in and shot bags of rice, I promise you. I guess my most memorable event in Vietnam was my experience with the Thanh Hoa Bridge. The Thanh Hoa Bridge was about 300 yards, 200 yards long, about 3 narrow lanes wide. It was built very early on, destroyed by the French when they left after Dien Bien Phu, rebuilt by the Vietnamese, and a main artery going south on Highway 1 Alpha. It had been a main target of the U.S. forces for years and years. I don't know how much to believe, but somebody said over 850 USN and U.S. Air Force sorties against that bridge, with something like 100 airplanes lost in the vicinity of the Thanh Hoa Bridge. We always thought that the guy that got the bridge would probably just go over and inadvertently drop a 25-pound practice bomb, we call them a Mark 76. It would hit somewhere near the bridge and the thing would collapse. That isn't exactly the way it happened, but on the 4th of October, 1972, the target came up. I was assigned to lead the strike. We had 2 airplanes loaded with 2 each 2,000-pound bombs, and 2 aircraft loaded with 2,000-pound walleyes. When we went after on the 4th, we didn't hit the bridge. My walleye, for instance, came off and it got hit by a 30-millimeter shell right after it left my airplane and blew up right about there. I don't know what else happened to us because I was interested in getting the hell out of there after that experience. So we went back on the 6th, and we loaded up the same load. We had a total of 4 Mark 84 2,000-pound bombs, 2 on each of 2 aircraft. My wingman and I had 2 walleyes. He had 1, I had 1. And we timed it so that we would come in sort of on I would say a west to east run, and the 2 airplanes with the bombs would go around the backside. We would roll in, and the idea was to hit the target simultaneously. So my wingman, Marv Baldwin, and I perched up here at about 14,000 feet. We rolled in with this TV-guided bomb, and you actually got a scope in the cockpit. It locks onto the target. You can actually see your aim point. There's a little thing that says it locks on, and then you hold that lock on until you're sure you got a good one, and then you release it, and it tracks itself down to the target, and that's the end of it. So Marv and I rolled in. We pulled the power back, popped the speed brakes. That's not what you want to do when somebody's shooting at you, but it looked like the smart thing to do then. I called lock up, he called lock up. I said 3, 2, 1, launch. We hit the button simultaneously, the two weapons came off, and he was literally locked in tight. Meantime, that was a signal for Don Sumner and Jim Bristol to roll in from the west and come at the bridge with their 4 2,000-pounders, and I saw the impacts. Literally, they all hit at the same time, and the world turned to dust and corruption and smoke and fire and whatever else, and we got the hell out of Dodge. Fortunately, a gent by the name of Wes Rutledge, who flew the RA-5C that afternoon, had a mission up in Hanoi, decided, not assigned to do so, but he decided, he knew there's a strike on that bridge that morning, so he decided to, on his own to run by and take a picture of it, which he did. And that night, about 6:30 in the evening, I got a call from the Iowa Intelligence Center saying, hey, you might want to come down here. We got a picture we want to show you. And it was the Thanwa Bridge. It was buckled. The center pylon was gone. If you read the history books, the Air Force will get credit for knocking it down in May, but you'll also read that the Vietnamese rebuilt it and were using it, and 7th Air Force were the people who assigned the target, and I figure they must have thought it was a worthwhile target because they kept assigning it. Fast forward, after we saw the picture, I got a call from Admiral Jack Big Cooley Christensen, who was the Cargrew commander. Lovely guy. Maybe the ugliest man on the planet, but one of the nicest men you ever meet. He called up and he said, I want to see you, and the 3 guys were with you. He had been at the briefing, by the way, when I briefed the Hop that morning. We went into his cabin, and if he were still alive, I wouldn't be able to tell this because they'd probably court-martial him. He said, I've been waiting for this picture for the last deleted 7 years. I'm so happy. If this wasn't a Navy ship, I'd buy you a drink. God damn it, I'm going to do it anyway. He picked up the phone. He says, bring me a pitcher of grapefruit juice. And my 3 wingmen, or the 3 other guys in the flight, and Jack Christensen and I sat in his flight cabin and drank about half a bottle of vodka that night at sea. Put me in jail, I don't give a damn. We'll talk to you later. That was my experience. Thank you.
Now, Admiral Bruce Bremner. Thanks, Snuff.
I'm going to talk about a couple of mission types. I was a young lieutenant, bachelor. I felt well-trained and confident and scared. I wasn't involved in the political scenario, or I didn't worry about anybody else in the squadron, the air wing, or on the ship. I worried about flying my mission, and every one I was going to do the very best I could, and I think that's the way almost everybody felt. I was a good instrument pilot and a poor carrier pilot. I've got 1,000 traps, no two of them alike. And the 2 types of missions I want to talk about. First, briefly, the Alpha Strike, which I didn't fly very many on. I made 2 Vietnam cruises on Enterprise, and the weather was very seldom conducive to VFR Alpha Strikes in my time over there. So 90-95% of my time was night and IFR weather. But on the Alpha Strikes, let me just hit it briefly first. Let me cover 2 quick missions. One was I had the duty one day, and we had the weather cleared, and they launched an Alpha Strike, which consisted of 6 A6s, a couple divisions of A4s, all bombers, a couple divisions of fighters, F4s, as flak suppressors, and then also as MiG cover. And led by our ops officer, they launched high, the mission was up on the outskirts of Hanoi. They launched and they fought their way up there. The missiles started coming, and they had to start maneuvering, killing off airspeed and altitude. And the bottom line was we lost 3 airplanes out of that, and they got turned back. One of those airplanes was Red McDaniel, a POW, and many of you know him. After that mission, several days later, the weather cleared again, and we sent the same strike, and I was on it. We had 4 A6s on that one, a couple divisions of A4s and the fighters. And we launched, and we started up there, 14,000. Flight was led by a guy named Glenn Coleman, my CO. He was XO at that time. And he did a tremendous job. He was determined to get there, and he was trying to maintain airspeed and altitude. And when the missiles started coming, he was trying to maneuver as little as possible and keep the air wing together. But the best he could do, he was keeping up the airspeed, but we gradually killing off the altitude. And by the time we got to the target area, then the battle was to try to climb up to a release altitude to roll in, which we did, and we got the bombs off in the area, but I was not proud of my hits, and I doubt that anybody else was. And we made it back to the ship. I saw or felt 7 missiles detonate between me and my leader. I was number 2, and I wasn't looking at anybody else. I was just keeping track of him. And so that's an example of my experience on Alpha strikes, which isn't extensive. But what I would like to put a little more time in is the A6 mission. A6A was relatively new then, had a decent weapon system, not the most reliable, but decent, and it could put hits in there fairly close if the target was radar significant. If the target wasn't radar significant, you had to have something that was radar significant with an accurate offset. Unfortunately, many of the targets assigned were not radar significant, and the poor bombardiers were having to take offsets off an edge of a karst, which they measured with tweezers off a World War II chart of some kind. So when you hear stories about the inaccuracy of the A6, they are true in one respect, in that the bombs didn't always go where we wanted them to go, but they went where the best information we had. But the way my bombardier and I did the mission was simple. We started out, initially everybody wanted to be devious. You'd make feints and last-minute turns and jinking and stuff to get in there thinking you're fooling somebody. But after a few missions, we decided that was all wasted effort. So what we'd do, we'd just launch off the ship, get at altitude, get things settled down, update the system the best we could, and we'd drop down in the water, and we'd have a planned entry point. And most of these missions were in the Red River Delta there, flat terrain except for a few karsts. And we'd drop down and go on a straight line from out in the ocean, out in the Gulf there, to our target inland. And this would be anywhere from 50 to 90 miles according to where the target was. And there's a lot of bar talk about the accuracy of missiles, what they could do to you, what the threats were. And we determined from a little bit of experience that people that talked about having missiles shot at them down low were blowing smoke. So we decided that we had 2 enemies in our environment. One was the ground, and the other was barrage fire AAA. And the ground was a bigger threat than the barrage fire. You just took your chances with the barrage fire, and but you didn't want to hit the ground. So we'd drop down out in the Gulf of Tonkin. I'd set my radar altimeter at 125 feet, and my goal was to maintain 200 feet and not to let the red light come on at 125 feet. So I'd try to stay at 200 feet, and we'd just bend the throttles forward, whatever speed we could get. My preferred load, and what I carried almost all the time, was 23 500-pound snake eye retards on 5 MERS. And we just come screaming in, and needless to say, the bombardier couldn't see much at that altitude. He would update the system, so we coasted in on the pre-planned coast-in point, staying at 200 feet, and we didn't have to worry about missiles at that altitude. There was lots of flak as you'd fly along random sites, and if you'd go near any populated areas or any other people around there, you hit a little barrage fire. And if you were going inland to a significant target, there was lots of unbelievable tracers. And consequently, before I over water on these missions, I always just bottomed out my seat. You couldn't look at the stuff. It was just too bad. And needless to say, my knees, I wasn't as brave as these other guys. My knees were out of control on these missions, flying at 200 feet. And A6 with that bomb load, 23,500 snake eyes, you get about 460 to 470 knots indicated. And the mechanical fuses supposedly were limited to 450, but you didn't pay any attention to that. We'd come screaming in there, straight line, no jinking, no maneuvering, and about a minute or so before the target, I'd tweak it up. I'd have it trimmed at the 460, 470, tweak it up to 400 feet, which was the minimum release altitude for snake eye retards, and hold it nice and steady, lining it up, giving the bombardier a chance for any last little tweaks. And then at the time of bomb release, when 23,500 pounds is almost 7 tons, so in a matter of milliseconds, you dump that off, and that airplane, of course, is trimmed at 460, 470, and instantly it wants to go 560. And it doesn't do that, though. It does it in altitude change. So the second that come off, you'd pop the nose forward, trying to keep it from climbing, get it back down to the 200 feet, and get a turn going. And a popular philosophy around the squadron was, get the bombs off and pull 5 Gs, 90 degrees. My philosophy was, I can't control my altitude that good at 200 feet, So I pop the nose, get it started down, and gently roll into increasing my angle back to 60 degrees, accelerating like mad, and trimming down and heading out. And if you got above, when you get above 200 feet, you could hear the fan song radar lock on you, and it just chirping away, and we could click it off by dumping out chaff. So you'd dump out some chaff and knock it off for about 5 seconds. But if you get back to 200 feet, the fan song would not lock on you. And head to the coast and go back to the ship for my normal no grade 1. That's it, Federico.
Thank you, Bruce. Great. Next, Little John.
Well, the story I'm going to tell is a unusual hop. And the reason I'm here to tell it is the guy I was flying with, Bear Lassiter, died about 30 years ago and is not here today, so I'm basking in his glory. He was the real hero of this mission, and he was the guy that got us out of this mess. Did you ever have one of those days when things just didn't go real well for you? Because we were flying a Marine squadron, flying off a carrier, and we were scheduled to air refuel after we got off the carrier there, and for some reason the air refueling got screwed up, and the rendezvous wasn't made on time, and et cetera, et cetera. But the bottom line was we got a full bag of fuel in my airplane. Our wingman, it was doubtful that he got a full bag because the strike force was on the way about the time he was about halfway on the fuel. So we had to cut him off in order for us to precede the strike force because we were also the weather recce. The target for that day was a suspected SAM assembly area, and it was a little bit north of the port of Haiphong, if I recall. It was out in the middle of nowhere, and it was an easy target. That should give you a pause right there when you have an easy target. Because we elected to go ahead and do this mission, even with the wingman possibly having a light fuel load, because what the heck, it's not that far away. We set up a combat air patrol just northwest of the target, but we never actually got into the combat air patrol mode because as soon as we crossed the coastline, I started getting calls from the radar picket ship out there. His call sign was Red Crown. The radar controller was a Navy chief by the name of Dutch Schultz, who I got to meet later that day. And he gave us outstanding information. And he vectored us over 60 miles for a pair of MiGs that was orbiting the Phu Quyen airfield over Hanoi. The Phu Quyen airfield is about 10 miles northeast of Hanoi. And I'm getting information from the radar picket ship all the way in. And I'm mumbling to the bear that I'm not real sure we ought to be doing this. And the bear is humming. He liked to hum when he was flying an airplane anyway, and this was just another day at the office for him. As we got in closer, we found out that the MiGs were orbiting Phu Quyen airfield. They started at about 15, 20,000 feet, and by the time we got to them, and I got a good radar lock, they were at a couple of hundred feet. There was a flight of two, and there were several MiGs also orbiting the area there, which again the Navy chief let us know. I had finally got a good lock on the lead aircraft. I went for the lead aircraft, and I told our wingman they were stacked in a right echelon. So I got this guy. I let the wingman know which one I was picking so that he could choose the other one if he so chose. We got a decent radar lock. Boom, boom. The bear let go with two missiles. I knew that little SOB was dead. I looked forward over the bear's shoulder, looking to see the debris in the MiG, beautiful machine. He was flying, and he'd gained a couple of angles on us. We started out at his 7 o'clock position, which is not a bad place to start a fight, but this guy dodged those two missiles. They were Sparrows, so the Sparrows weren't a great missile in those days anyway. And I thought, oh crap, this is definitely one of those days. So we fought in a Luftberry, and for the fighter guys, the Luftberry is two planes opposite sides of the circle trying to gain advantage of each other. Now our wingman is there the whole time. It was his first mission over Route Package 6 at this time. We thought it was an easy target, so we'll take him along. The whole fight stayed at 200 feet. We would gain an angle on the MiG, and Bear would let another Sparrow go, and he'd gain some angles on us. And things are starting to get a little dicey in the fuel department when you go into a 4.5-minute dogfight, and this fight was so tight that it was over the east end of the Phu Quyen airfield runway. And we were taking flak like you can't believe. I mean, everybody and their brother down there was shooting at us. And we sort of figured after the whole thing was over that this might have been a kind of a trap. I mean, these guys were dragging us very ably, dragging us through all the gunfire, and we had plenty of fan song radar tweeting on us. We had plenty of fire can radar, especially every time we got into a good position to shoot them. Never got a great sidewinder shot at that particular time. And then the wingman hollered bingo, and he took out heading back east toward the shore, toward the beach. God, I wish I'd have thought of that. That solved our whole problem. We never could get a good, clean shot at this MiG-21. As soon as we came out of our turn, the MiG leveled his wings and went after our wingman, went after Scotty. Bear leveled his wings and got a good, solid growl on the Sidewinder, and he let that, which was our 7th missile, That's another thing here. This is the old 8 missile trick, because the other Navy Phantom squadrons out on the Tonkin Gulf at that time carried 6 missiles. We carried 8. So somebody on the ground might have been counting the missiles as we shot at him, because after we'd fired 6 missiles at him, and also when our wingman cut out, well, he went after the wingman. Bear got him. Everything after the cockpit was gone. I mean, that Sidewinder did a hell of a job on that MiG, and we were quite happy about that. Now we have to get back together, because when you're separated from your wingman up in Route Package 6 area, that's not a good thing. And Scotty's trying to help us. He's calling the shots. He says, "Okay, I see you right now." He says, "I'm right on your nose." Well, what Scotty was looking at was another MiG who had passed about 5 miles off of our left. This is where Bear, with his great situational awareness, he recognized that we had a black MiG. They were all different colors. We had the silver one. The black MiG passed us up and was going after our wingman. Bear got him with our last Sidewinder, but it was a fleeting shot, because the MiG broke. Scotty broke and the MiG overshot, and then the MiG dodged our missile, and he popped a flare at the same time. And we winged him because he was puffing smoke out but he was still flying, and he turned off and was heading back for home there. Meanwhile, Scotty and Bear, we got together again, but we had to go slow because Scotty was sucking fumes. We had a tanker waiting for us at the end of, at the mouth of the Red River. But while the dogfight was going on, there was another another Phantom section that was also had the same mission that we did. And they passed through the dogfight while all this stuff is going on. They passed overhead and picked up a flak hit and landed back aboard the America with the 57 holes in. They just passed through the area and picked up 57 holes. And they changed controllers on the radar picket ship, and some senior guy got in there, and he got the chief out of the way, but then he sent the tanker that was waiting for Scotty after the Phantoms, which were heading back to the carrier, the other squadron, the other section of Phantoms. And they were really smoking. They were going about 600 knots, and the tanker couldn't catch them anyway, but there went our tanker. While we're working with Scotty trying to get him back to the beach, we took a SAM hit. And Bear and I just barely got out of that thing. Luckily, we were able to stay with the debris that we were flying till we got past the coastline, so that when we bailed out, we were over the water. We got rescued by the toughest bunch of sailors I've ever seen. They fly those armor-plated helicopters with 50 caliber machine guns sticking out all over them. This guy jumped in the water and pulled me up, and then they went over and got the Bear. We got a chance to meet the chief who was controlling the fight that night, because we spent the night on the USS England. And then we got a good chance to meet Admiral Christensen a couple of days later. When you lose a couple of airplanes, even in combat, you get a chance to... And you know, he wasn't all that jolly there, at least at first. But Snuffy's right. He's one hell of a nice guy. We got to know him pretty well after that. And that's our story.
Okay. Thank you, Lil John. Snuffy, you want to comment?
What he didn't tell you was when they got hit with that SAM and got out of the water, he lost control of the airplane, and they were both pinned up against the canopy. They couldn't pull the ejection curtain. And he's got a recording, which I've personally heard, of both Bear and Little John literally keep putting their fingers up on their head, trying to get between their head and the canopy. And to this day, neither one knows which one pulled the curtain, but one of them did, and they got out, and his eyes were about the color of that tire because of all the negative G's he was pulling. He's right ugly anyway, but boy, you got a red-eyed ugly guy. You got a real guy.
Thanks, Nuff. All right, next, Frank Hamrick.
Okay, I brought along a model of the aircraft I'm going to be talking about because in all probability you may have seen it out on the flight line or some museum somewhere, but you probably don't know a lot about it. That makes two of us because this thing was unbelievably complicated. It was about 20 years ahead of its time. It had systems on it that didn't become routine until maybe in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But it was one monstrous aircraft. To give you some idea, just going in, this aircraft in a 10-minute run over North Vietnam with all cameras running could take approximately 4,000 feet of film. That's a lot of film, isn't it? But that's probably just slightly more than all the selfies that the co-eds at Panama City are taking on Anyway, I would like to just say a few words about the aircraft, and then I would like to mention some constants that we held to over the beach, and then finally a couple war stories. On deck, we catapulted off at 78,000 pounds. Now that's a lot of weight. I don't know how many of you have flown aircraft that are in that weight. We went off at 78,000. We started trapping at 47,000. After the catapult, if we didn't get this nose up to 20 degrees, we were going to rooster tail the exhaust in the water. And you only did that once, and you're probably not going to do it again. It's a little hairy. But where the aircraft got its reputation, bad reputation, and rightfully so, was on landing. Because if you look at the moment of that's heavy. And at 47,000 pounds, you just could not fool around with, I think I'm going to take it down a little bit. That ain't going to work. Because once this thing started down, it was hard to arrest it. It's the first aircraft I ever flew that I flew more with the vertical speed indicator than I did with all the other sensors. And if that thing varied from 600 feet, I got it back right now. And to give you some idea, my first Caracal cruise in this thing, 10 day trips and 6 night, I had about 10 or 11 of them drop nose at ramp 1 wire. Now all of you carrier pilots know that's not a good pass at all. But after I'd been in the fleet, I made 27 straight OK 3 wires, and that you know is a good pass. So you really did have to learn to fly this aircraft aboard. It just didn't come naturally like you do in some of the other aircraft. Let's talk about some of the parameters over the beach. We never flew over the beach in North Vietnam unless we had a F-4 escort with us. We could not go. The flight was aborted. And why? Because we needed the F-4 to tell us about tracking missiles, tracking AAA, because we could not see down and we couldn't see forward enough to be of any value of spotting things. So we really needed that F-4 all the time. Speed, the cameras could care less what speed we're going. I can almost count the times that I was in basic engine over North Vietnam. I'd take it up to min burner, and I would be between min and max. The speed, I never let the speed get below 500 knots. If maybe once or twice, but I stayed up close to 600, and occasionally supersonic, because this plane would move out. You'll hear this term jinking. And I think one of the people have already referred to that. We had to keep this airplane going in some flight parameter continuously, either climbing and turning or descending. And you had to do this about every 18 or 20 seconds because that's going to knock off the radar down below, break lock, and then you'll have to start the solution all over again. The guy who relieved me as ops officer on Constellation, the second cruise, was doing the jinking, and he was doing it according to the book. But the mistake he made, he got into a rhythmic climb, turn, descend. Well, these gunners are not, they're not stupid. They may not be the sharpest tack on the ball. So I think after about the second or third one of these climb, turn, descend, they shoot him right through the middle, broke up the aircraft, and both crew members went away. The other thing that I made a mistake of, and you only make that mistake one time, is that on the forward edge of the wing are called droops. And if you want to go faster, you bring these things up to the clean position, and it's worth about 75 knots. If you have them down, you get a better turning radius. Well, the first flight over the beach and the first time I'm going to be shot at. By the way, you might want to think about that every once in a while. How does it feel to be shot at for the first time? I'm not so sure that anyone can explain it, but that's a pretty awesome feeling. I mean, I'm going towards Thanwa Bridge in November of '66, and the sky is full of stuff, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, here about a month ago, I was watching TV with my family, and now I'm going to go through this stuff. It's a pretty airy feeling. I can't describe it, but it's pretty awesome. But I didn't have the droops up into the clean position. The backseater got on me about slowing up. I told him I wasn't slowing up, and then it reminded me to bring the droops up to clean, and immediately we went 75 knots faster, quicker. I'm sure that little Vietnamese gunner down there was saying, "The American big pilot is going too fast for me." The altitude, that could care less, the cameras, about altitude, because it worked on this VG over H formula. And so we started off the cruise at 3,500 feet, 3,800, and then we just kept working up. Well, you get up to a point where the missiles become a threat, so now you got to come back down. So we were up and down on that. The other thing that I screwed up on the first flight over the Thanwa Bridge was just as soon as the bridge disappeared under my nose, I started to break away. Well, we're still about 8 or 10 miles out. Now the backseater's all over my case, so now I've got to turn back. We're going to more time over the high threat area. So from then on, I made sure that I was over the target, or listened to the backseater to tell me that, okay, we got it in the vertical camera, so we're all right. If we did not have, and this is me personally, and I'm at my backseat of the second cruise is in the audience today, if every piece of that electronic countermeasure that we had on the aircraft wasn't working, I didn't go. I don't care how urgent the mission was. I did not take that aircraft over the beach unless every piece of that hardware was operating. Life's too short. So I made sure I held to that. And the other thing is that once we, no long straight ends to the target. Another, try to do something before you get to the target. We didn't have that much going for us. We certainly didn't want to waste it on these long, straight and level, paths to the target. And then another screw up on my first flight was that just as soon as the bridge, he said he had it, that we were to make a real hard descending turn to get it to escape real quickly. So that's what we have for some parameters, and I won't have to say this again. I would like to talk a little bit about the missions that we had. The first one was pre-strike. Now, that was the one at the Thanwa Bridge. I'll remember that for the rest of my born days, because I made every mistake on that flight, but I didn't make it the second time. I'll guarantee you that. I learned from that, and it's a good thing I had that backseater alert, because he would have left us in cruise droops, and that would not have been good. Post-strike, I often wondered why they needed immediate photography of something they just bombed. I never got that. I never figured that out. But I was a part of the Alpha Strike 50 planes that went into a transshipment point south of Hanoi. And we were orbiting with the escort out over water off Haiphong. And I've never in my life heard the like of AAA and missile calls. It got so bad and so confusing that the flight leader came up on the air and made the best call of the war, I think. This is strike leader. Unless the missiles are an imminent threat, stay off the air. Now that's pretty cool. Give you some idea of the number of missiles in the air. I think we lost one or two planes on that, but I think we're lucky we got by that way. When I thought that the smoke had cleared and I could see it, I started a big wrapped up turn to head in, and the cap, who orbiting over the target, said, "No, you can't come in now. Now we're going to reestablish the orbit." Now you're getting a little bit more nervous because you've heard all these missile calls and all these AAA calls. When we went over the target, there wasn't a shot in the air. I'll never forget that. I guess they must have expended it all before we ever got there. We also had the capability of a side-looking radar. Some of the best imagery that I've ever seen on tape comes from this radar, that side-looking radar that we had. I don't know how effectively it was for the strike people, but we could produce that. The infrared, we didn't have it the first cruise, but we got it the second cruise, and we got it without any tactics. We got it without any knowledge of what time of day we ought to run this. There is a gentleman in the audience who claims that he was lost over North Vietnam on a night IR run, wandered over this little village, got a perfect frame of photography with good matrix, which is the flight data, came back, they processed it, and this Master Chief convinced them that that is a hot target. Go strike that target. It was the little village of Ha Tin, and there were ammo trucks and fuel trucks in the village, and they bombed it. They didn't have to do any reattacks because the little town blew up, and now you don't see Ha Tin anymore. The Vigilante also had the capability of making one pass from north to south and update the order of battle. And it could do this effectively. And we could put an 18-inch panoramic camera with it, and at the same time that we were picking up the electronic emissions, we could photograph the sites. It really was a heck of a capability. On one particular flight that I was with Gunder, who's in the audience today, we had something like 140 radar emitter sites on that one flight, just on the north-south axis of North Vietnam. Now you think about that. That country wasn't very wide and it wasn't very long, but 140 sites, and that was back in '68. The most interesting flight that I had over there was in June of '67, where I was a part of the first official surface-to-air missile hunt. We knocked off ship's work for 2 days and hunted missiles, and the strike aircraft went after them and took them out. We photographed 6 of 7 sites, and they destroyed all 6 sites the next day. That made a believer out of me about if there's not any flak in the air, things are safe. That's a wrong, bad assumption, because I'm with Bob Glaze, and some of you may know him. He was my escort, and as we were leaving, I was looking over at Hanoi, and I said, "This has really been a piece of cake flight." And all of a sudden, Bob calls up and said that he had been hit. So we made it to the water. That's one of the times that I got out of afterburner and went to basic engine. But we went out over water. I went back and took a look at him. He had a hole probably about 3 or 4 feet across, right at the wing root where the engine or the wing goes into the fuselage. We got back to the ship, Now check this out. Bob Glaves has one engine and shoots an OK3 wire. That's pretty awesome to me. I come around, I've got two good engines, and I drop nose at ramp one wire, which is not a good thing. The wrap up for the deployment over there is that we made 34 vigilante deployments by something like 6 or 7 squadrons. So that's roughly 6 during the war. We lost 15, a total of 18 aircraft, 15 to AAA, 1 to a missile, and 2 to a MiG. Crew members, we lost, we put 12 in Hanoi Hilton, and we put 16 killed in action, and we got 8 of them back. So that gives you some idea. So now, if anyone asks you if you know anything about the vigilante, you can tell them that you were briefed for 10 or 12 minutes on it, and you know as much as Frank Hammer. Thank you.
Well done, Frank. Thank you. Now, T.R. Schwartz.
I'll testify to that vigilante coming aboard with Frank. I was an Air Wing LSO. And at night, the vigilante comes aboard, and you've got a group of LSOs standing around laughing and scratching. The vigilante calls the ball, and you look around, and they're all gone down watching the movie. This is a couple of short stories about Air Wing 21 on the Bonnie Dick in 1967. And the Bonhomme Richard was a small carrier, as you all remember, about half size of the Enterprise that Bruce was flopping around on. The tasking was the same. We went to the same places. We just had to work a little harder. Spend all day flying, spend all night doing unwrap, loading bombs on the little ship. VA-212 was on the Air Wing, and they did the combat introduction of the Walleye, which is the TV glide bomb that Snuffy managed to put to good use later. The Navy had been infatuated with the Dragon's Jaw Fanwa Bridge for years, and so 212 was all warmed up for that. They had a model in the ready room with the Fanwa Bridge and a golden rivet painted on it so that if you managed to roll in and hit the golden rivet 12 times in a row, the bridge would fall down, the word end, Ho Chi Minh would give up and we'd go home. Well, okay, so we have a warm-up mission for the Walleye. They go into the North Vietnamese Army barracks down south. The sun is in the back. It's a contrast weapon. They put the weapon through the window. Ho Chi Minh's little cousin is down there in the duty officer's desk with his feet up on the desk reading the Bruce Lee comic book, and this thing comes in the window and goes boom. So they're all assured that it works. The word gets back to LBJ and McNamara, who are directing the air war on the Walleye. And so it's time to go to the Fanwa Bridge. Next day, March 12th, Homer Smith and his gang all load up with the Walleye, and they make multiple runs. These are early production weapons, multiple runs, trying to get them locked on, do their thing. Jane Fonda is down there shooting at them with the 37s. There's so much 37 going on, it just looks white down there, the smoke coming off of them. And they prang about a half a dozen walleyes off the Golden Rivet. And, of course, the bridge is still standing, and gave up on that for a while. There's a couple of interesting things. Cater says to Steve Briggs in the middle of a run, Steve, don't look out, it's terrible. CAG says to Homer, the skipper of 212, who never turned away from a good fight, Homer, no more multiple runs. And Homer says, CAG, quote of the day, number 3, don't sweat it, we'll be back in a minute. So I've got to talk about going to Canaan with the Cloud. We called the Cloud the dumb bombers. We had the smart bombers in 212, and we had the dumb bombers. You know, we were the kids that we went to school in the short bus, so we get to load up all our Mark 82s and do a job. Canaan is south of Haiphong, and it's in the Haiphong Air Defense sector. And there's a MiG base in Haiphong. And The cloud goes in, and the cloud rolls in and drops a whole bunch of bombs, and at the very same time, now we've got fighters overhead. Paul Spear and his guys are racing around at 450 knots with a couple of sidewinders on it, right over the target at the same time you roll in. Well, guess what? The air defense sector up there keeps track of all this. They put the MiGs right in the middle of the strike group at Pull-Out. So they got Charlie Stackhouse sandwiched between he and another one and shot him down. We didn't get him back in March. But what we learned was those guys are really good on their air defense sector radar, and you guys and the fighters got to be in there at the timing is everything. You know, you got to be there at the time the bombers are bombing because they're paying attention to the ground, dodging a little stuff. You guys got to be right flat back to do some good work. If not, we're going to lose one. I think we got Charlie back about the same time we got Arb back. When was that, Arb? March of '73. There you go. So it's time to go to Cap. And we go to Cap with a big alpha strike of dumb bombers and roll in simultaneously. The job is to bust up some MiGs on the ground, fuel tanks if you can see them, the tower maybe if you're lucky, and whatever. So it's a simultaneous roll in, about a dozen or so, 16 A4s, and they're perpendicular to the runway. They go in. There's a couple of MiGs that fly through the formation on the way out. The score is just that. We got about 6 or 8 on the ground, a couple of them taking the runway, and 2 in the air, amazingly. So we felt pretty good about that. That kind of got even with Charlie Stackhouse. May 16th, we got Ken Cameron out on a flight. He's the XO of our squadron, and he's over Van. We're convinced they had a gunnery school there. They nailed him with an 85, so we were XO-less for a while. The paperwork was reduced a little bit until he didn't join us back. He somehow disappeared in the jail. So May 19th comes around, and LBJ and McNamara really want to get something done with the walleye. It's Ho Chi Minh's birthday, so they man up VA-212, Mike Cater, and Homer Smith, Paul Spear with about 16 Crusaders, and they come up the scenic route up the south, over the Karst Ridge, into the lowland to go to the thin of the Hanoi power plant. And first thing happened is they get hacked by 8 MiGs and all the SAMs in the world. And that drives them down. 2 Crusader guys are lost. There's 4 shot down, by the way, by the good guys in the Crusaders. That made it kind of worthwhile. And they put the walleyes through the windows in the power plant, but it's still online. So they have to go back in another day. On the next day, Homer Smith is leading the flight to the Wangbi power plant now, just a little bit north of Hanoi. Bless his heart, there's no fight that Homer ever turned his back on, and they nail him, just flat nail him, and he's on the ground. And I don't think he made it to the camp at all. We thought he was a KIA, and that's the way he was reported. So there's a couple of leaders out of the way. Everybody's moving up. And May 21st, same thing, back to the Than Hoa power plant. This time the guys put the weapons through the window, and the power plant's down. They send the RF-8 over later, and by later, late at night, and there's only a sprinkle of little lights around, and so they're convinced the power plant's out for a while. July 14th, I'll be darned if we don't lose our skipper, Bifuller. We're on a little bridge south called the Phu Lai Bridge, and it's the cloud again. And we roll in, and Mr. Sam lifts off. You can't miss him. He's a big cloud of smoke when he comes off the rail. And he levels out, and I'm kind of back in the pack just far enough that I can see what's happening. And I said, "Skipper, it's tracking you." And he said, "Roger that." Next thing you know, he doesn't do anything except put his bombs on the bridge. Sam smacks him right in the nose, and he's out hanging in the parachute. And the guy's on the ground, terrible. They're shooting him in the parachute, and he's playing possum. Droops his head, hanging there in the straps, falls in a heap. A couple of us race by to see what's going on. He's laying there, not moving around. But this is really tough. Big mistake. We go back and we report him KIA. Well, that's dumb. That word gets back to Marianne, his charming bride, after about a week. Well, he shows up in the Hanoi Times with his picture. So there's a big oops there, good news and bad news, you know. Buy's alive, he's in jail, and we don't know when we're going to ever get him out. So we learned that if anybody's down, what you do is they're just down and they're missing in action for a while. Everybody's still awake? You hear me in the back? I got about another 2 minutes. You okay back there? 21 July, big important fuel ammo depot called Sata, and we're going to take a cloud of A4s in there, about 20 of them, all loaded up with Mark 82s. Now, Bruce could have done the job with 2 A6s, right? But no, we got 16 A4s, and we sprinkled bombs over the whole area. And so we're all gathered up. We're going to go north of Haiphong up there. There's a karst ridge, and between that and China, we're down sneaking up on them. We're really going to sneak up on them. And climb up to the roll-in altitude. And our formation is the cloud. Of course, we got to have some fighters in the middle of it with us because we know the MiGs will be there. And we got to have some iron hand, which is the code name for our Shrike guys that Sir Snuffy was talking about. And your job as an iron hand is up there to kind of listen, and everybody's got the same gear, but the bombers and the fighters are all choked up because they know they're going to have something to do. Iron hand's got nothing to do. I mean, he's a free agent in the dance. All he's got to do is tell everybody somebody's ready to shoot at him. Okay? And Pouncer 1 has got an F-8 escort named Timmy Hubbard, because it's kind of lonely up there, and you feel like if somebody's going to pick you off, the MiG will come up and pick off the Pouncer, so it's always good to have an F-8 escort. Drone, drone, drone. 2 minutes short of the target, A4s are all huddled up, and the first call that comes out is, hey, Pouncer 1, heads up, you got a couple of MiGs behind you. Pouncer 1 looks back and says, to shit, there's 8. And there was. Red Isaacs is in the pack with his 4 Crusaders, along with Bobby Kirkwood and Dempelwolf. Now, Red Isaacs' wingman on this flight is on his 2nd combat mission. And he lost the fight and lost the flight, and he's overhead, so Red's all by himself. This kid's overhead at 15,000 feet. So Red pulls up, shoots 1. Bam, he's got a MiG down. Bobby Kirkwood pulls up, shoots MiG. At the very same time Bobby Kirkwood shoots with his Sidewinder, Dempelwolf shoots. And the Crusader's got this great big old round bulletproof glass up there, and I guess maybe he didn't see his leader. But anyhow, both these missiles go off and chase the MiG down. But wait, and the MiG blows up. But wait, back up 5 seconds. This missile comes off and goes homing of Kirkwood, home straight for Bobby's tailpipe up here. It was so close by the F-8, it chops off the starboard UHT. I mean, it's this, and nobody says anything. I'm all choked up. I'm overhead looking down at this whole thing. It's Pouncer 1. Don't know what to say. I got my big 37 millimeter camera, but I can't do anything about it because there's a SAM getting ready to shoot. So the fight goes on. Now we got 2 in the chutes. Timmy Hubbard was my escort on Pouncer 1. Timmy is out banging on a MiG, and he shoots an old AIM 9B, which doesn't do anything, misses it. He shoots all his guns at this MiG-17. It's sparkling and farting and burning and chuffing, and he shoots all the Zunis he has on it. He's loaded it as a flak suppressor spare, and he had a Sidewinder here and a bunch of Zunis there. And pieces are flying off the MiG. And he pulls up right beside him and gives him the 5-fingered sign with his big hand, and the kid jumps out, and the MiG blows up. So the bombers aren't at the target. There's 3 MiGs down. Red Isaacs is busy with a couple MiGs because he doesn't have a wingman. Kirkwood can't fight because he's figured out his starboard UHT is shot off. He better be quiet about that. And Timmy Hubbard has a quote of the day. Pouncer 1, this is Pouncer 2. I got one with a Zuni. I'm ammo minus and I'm bingo. Okay, fine. The bombers pull up and roll in. So you got 3 Crusaders out of the fight. 1 kid's lost up here. And the bombers just roll in. And Red's on his way out. And there's 2 MiGs behind him now shooting at him, and he's on fire. Quote of the day number 2. This is Page Boy 2. I've got a couple of them behind me, and I'm burning. Okay. You know, there's 25 airplanes on the same frequency, huh? And it's just dead quiet. I got a couple behind me, and I'm burning. Everybody's looking around for Red. And we know he doesn't have a wingman. And I look across the circle, and I'm, you know, Iron Hand, you're kind of a free agent up just trying to shoot the SAM or keep everybody covered and warned on the SAM. I look over there, and there's Red, and he's burning, and there are 2 MiGs about him, and he's headed to China, and I key the mic, and I said, Red, turn right, don't go to, you know, that way, it'd be an ugly SAR, get headed towards the water, and I swoop down now, and here I am with my Shrike on one side that I can't shoot, and 4 Zunis on the other side, and I get up real close to him and squeeze a pair of Zunis off that came off the launcher, 1-2, right between the Red and the 2 MiGs, and they wake up and go away. And that's the end of the story, except we all get back aboard ship now. They're massive, everybody's back. Everybody gets aboard. Even Kirkwood gets aboard. Red's fire goes out. And so the score is now 3 MiGs are down. A couple of Crusaders are damaged. We go to the big debrief. Nobody can sort this thing out. Paul Spear, the CEO of 211, says, hey, TR, let's go down in the hangar deck and we look at the damage down in the hangar deck on these 2 airplanes. Red's got a great big giant hole in the fuselage, and that's bad news in an F-8, as you well know. It could go off anyway. And Bobby Kirkwood's stabilator, that starboard unit horizontal tail, Chance Watt called an elevator, is gone. And all the metalsmiths are standing around saying, Chief, what are we going to do about this? To which the chief said, look, Schmuckatelli, you guys take the stabilator off of this airplane and throw it over to the side. Jones, you go get the good stabilator off of this burned airplane and you put it on there. He said, I want that thing turned up and ready for the morning launch at 7 o'clock. And they did, and it was, and that's Navy leadership from the CPO level that you've never seen before. And that's the end of my story.
Great, TR. Well done. Thank you. Well, I'd like to turn it back over to Admiral Smith now, just to sort of wrap it up, round it out, and talk about then and a little bit later in your career and lessons learned and so forth. Stuffy, over to you.
Well, the first thing I'd have to tell you to learn about this, don't ever go on a hop with T.R. Schwartz. Before I get into the wrap-up here, let me just tell you that about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I saw a documentary on the Smithsonian Channel entitled Spy in the Hanoi Hilton. It's about Admiral Stockdale and how Admiral Stockdale and a cadre of a very few of his fellow prisoners were able to communicate with the outside world. All of this has been super secret up until recently. It was released in a very, very accurate documentary. I had the pleasure of having known Admiral Stockdale, and I always thought he was a pretty special guy. But after seeing that, I mean, there's just no bounds to my admiration and respect for that man. If you get a chance, Smithsonian, A Spy in the Hanoi Hilton, you ought to take a look at it. I told you at the very beginning we did a lot of stupid things in Vietnam. One of them was we trolled for SAMs. I actually was asked by a chief of staff on the Carl C in 1967. We were not allowed to shoot. We were not allowed to attack SAM sites within a 30-mile radius of Hanoi. unless the SAM site shot at us. And we had returned from a mission, and one of the SAM sites up there had shot, but we had already dropped all of our weapons. So we were reporting this, and the chief of staff says, well, how about we load you back up, and you go up there and see if you can get to shoot at you again, and then you can attack them. And I said, are you going to lead this thing, Fike? Come on up here. Come. The other thing was, I mean, those kinds of rules of engagement are absolutely stupid. But even more so is we were engaged in a sortie race. It was the Air Force versus the Navy. It was the carrier Ranger versus the carrier America. How many airplanes could you get off? It didn't make any difference how many targets you hit, how much tonnage you dropped. It was a sortie race. So I learned not to do that. I learned about rules of engagement. You get the rules of engagement right, and the pilots that you give the orders to will trust you and have confidence that you're on their side. When we were doing the rules of engagement for an air operation in Bosnia, General Mike Ryan was the air commander. He developed a very complex and complete Annex E rules of engagement. And we knew since this was a NATO environment, we were going to have trouble getting all these things approved. But Mike and I agreed that that was the one thing that we would lay down in front of the train about, was the ROE. And we sent this to the various nations, and we got the ROE, the annex, back about 3 weeks later, and it had about 300 questions about various parts of the ROE. Well, about a month later, not a month later, about a week and a half later, I happened to be in a conversation with then Chairman John Chalikashvili, and he asked me if we were having any problems, and I said, yeah, we are. And I told him we'd gotten all these questions back on this ROE. And he folds his arm and he says, well, what stupid country is asking all the questions? I said, sir, your staff asked 197 of them. And he said, I didn't even know the damn thing was in the building. So it took about another 3 days and we got all that approved. But the bottom line is you don't go after stupid targets. You don't go after a target that's already been destroyed in order to keep the sortie count up. You don't troll for SAMs. And if there's SAMs there, your ROE includes to go take them out. And so I got in an argument after Scott O'Grady got shot down with a SAM just in northwest Bosnia, SA-6. I got into an argument with my boss about whether or not we should be able to attack all known SAM sites in Bosnia. And the answer I got back was no, can't do that. I said, okay, we're not flying in there. He said, you can't do that. You're allowing the Serbs to establish a no-fly zone. I said, no, I'm not. You're allowing the Serbs to operate SAM missiles, and my pilots are going to get shot down. And you told me when I took over this job, Snuffy, don't let me do anything stupid. And boss, you're doing something stupid. Well, you know, there's some advantages to having absolutely no promotion potential. I guess the lessons that I took away from all of this, if you're going to put your troops in harm's way, do whatever you can to make the mission clear, give them the resources they need to carry it out, and then get the hell out of the way. And that's...
Attaboy.
Now, you heard me mention Mike Ryan, you heard me briefly mention Scott O'Grady. O'Grady got shot down on the 2nd of June. I'm standing in my office, I get a note passed in front of me. We got an aircraft down in northwest Bosnia. That's all we knew, F-16. So I was talking to my boss, George Challen, at the time. And I said, I got to go, I got a problem here. So we found out that we'd had an SA-6 come up through the clouds. And oh, by the way, we had intel of the presence of that SAM site under that pilot about 10 minutes before he got shot down, but they didn't transmit it to us because of the sources it was given, and that we didn't have the information available to us. So O'Grady goes down. I personally did not even ask for his name because I knew I would be interviewed by the press a great deal. This is the first airplane that the U.S. had lost in Bosnia. So I didn't want to know what this guy's name was. So we go through the process. We move a Marine Expeditionary Unit up into the North Adriatic Sea with a MEU aboard, and that MEU, a Marine Expeditionary Unit, there was a TRAP team, Tactical Recovery Aircraft and Personnel, the purpose of which is to go in and extract pilots if they get shot down. Hello? So they're up there steaming around, and sure enough, as we get into this thing, about 2 or 3 days, all of the talking heads in Washington are on TV saying there's no way that this pilot could have survived, where the missile hit the airplane. It would broken the canopy, the cockpit in half. It's tumbling through the clouds. There's too many G-forces. He could have never punched out. If he did punch out, he's been captured, yada, yada, yada. Well, you heard TR talking about guys looking on the ground. This guy's dead, laying on the ground, and you report KIA, and a week later he shows up in the front page of the paper. Well, that experience that Mike and I had, Mike Ryan, by the way, lost his twin brother in Vietnam. But that experience that Mike Ryan and I had in Vietnam taught us we don't ever give up. Our theory was we will search for him until we determine that he is dead or captured. We're not going to give up on time. It isn't going to happen. And so we went after this. I mean, we kept after it. We flew 400 or 500 sorties looking for this guy. And sure enough, I'm up at my headquarters on about the 8th of June. It was 6.5 days later. And I get a call, boss, we got comms with Basher 5-2. He's alive. And so we immediately launched the rescue effort. My good friend and formerly, we worked with him, Marty Burt, who unfortunately died a couple of years ago. Marty was the colonel in charge of the MEU, and Marty took 22 Marines in, and they picked up O'Grady on the 7th day, and he brought him out. And, of course, the heat then started. Why did you send 22 Marines? And I said, why not? Well, why did you not tell me that you were going to send 22? You didn't ask me. Well, why did you put the ship so close? Because I told the CO of the ship to get that damn thing as close as he could so we could reduce the time to go in. President of France calls the President of the United States and complains that Admiral Smith has launched a rescue operation and puts at risk a bunch of hostages that the Serbs are holding that happen to be UN observers. I said, UN observers don't work for me. I sent O'Grady into harm's way. If he gets shot down, I'm going to go get him. If that ain't good enough, fire my ass. Says, okay, they did. Actually, they didn't. I stayed around for another couple of months. But what you learned as a junior officer takes you forward into these situations, and you can't forget, you were there one time when people were making dumb decisions. Don't make the same decisions as a senior officer and have them lose confidence and faith in you as their leader. And that's what we learned. Freddie, thank you very much.
Well said, Snuffy. Well said. Thank you for that. Little John, have you got a comment?
Yes. One night on the USS America, I went down to strike operations to take a look at what the target was going to be the next day. Snuffy was in there with a bunch of the other attack guys planning their missions and everything, and the captain of the ship walks in. And he walks over and looks at where the target is. This was at a nasty place up there right around Hanoi. And the captain says, geez, I wish I was going with you guys tomorrow. And Snuffy said, well, you can have my hop, sir. And I knew right then that I was going to quit sucking up to Snuffy. He was a lieutenant commander then, and I wasn't going to waste any brownie points on him. So.
All right, one last one.
One other thing, sir. I do think it was insulting of you the way you gave Bear and I the Vince Wibbs Sharp Trader of the Year award for trading 2 Phantoms for a MiG.
Thanks, Little John. Well, we've got time for a couple of questions. Any from the, if you have questions, please come up to the center aisle here and use the microphone so we can all hear what the question is. Come on up, sir. Fire away.
Okay. My name is Bob Hansen, and first I'd like to say that I'm privileged and proud to be a former squadron mate of Admiral Smith. I was on the America with him in V-82 in 1972, and I was the plane captain on streetcar 302 that our CO, Commander Don Sumner, was flying, and I knew something was different about that hop because they don't normally put 2,000-pound bombs on your airplane. So the CO came up and strapped him in, and off he went. And sometime later, I was on the internet a few years ago and looking at Vietnam information, and I came across a picture of a strike photo, belly camera of an A-7, and it was, I believe, Lieutenant J.G. Jimmy Brister, who was the wingman for the CO, and he got a belly camera picture of the CO pulling out of his dive, and got a picture of that. I don't know how that picture came out and it got in, but I was there, and my airplane was part of that against the Thanwa Bridge.
Good on you. Good on you. Thank you very much for that comment. Something, any follow-up to what he said?
Only that I remember him running around the deck in those brown shirts, dragging chains around his neck. Nobody works harder on a ship, on the flight deck of a ship, than a plane captain. They get about 4 hours sleep a night. They're the most loyal people in the world. I love you to death, Bob.
All right. Yes, sir.
Good morning. First of all, thank y'all for coming. My question is hopefully not too far off track. I want to know how many of you gentlemen attended Top Gun later, how that affected your subsequent performance, and did any of you ever fly against the MiGs that operated in Area 51 in the MiG exploitation program?
Okay, I understand. Who flew against the types, the MiGs up out in the desert? Little John, did you?
Bear did. I did later on.
Yeah. And TR?
Sir?
Did you fly against the, hello?
My government does not permit me to answer.
I'm not sure which government you're talking about, but city government, the county. No, I did, and it was extremely valuable training. Absolutely. Thank you for that question. Good.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for your service and your message. My name's Dave Ayers, Commander, U.S. Navy, retired. In 1964, I deployed on the USS Constellation with Heavy Attack Squadron 10, and we had 12 A3Ds on that airplane. I mean, on that ship. So when we got there, they decided maybe we ought to offload 6 of them to QB Point, so we had room on the ship in case we had a straight wing A3. After the Gulf of Tonkin strikes, we started a different pattern of operations, and those, about 10 of us, were at the deck on QB Point with 6 of our airplanes, trying to figure out, if we're in a war, what is our mission? Because we were not in contact with what was going on the ship or anywhere else. So one of our guys, Lieutenant Commander Dick Hopper, who's a retired captain now, had been a staff caller, so he said, well, let's put together a strike operations plan for what our airplanes could contribute. We were the bombers, and we were the only mining-capable aircraft on the ship. So we built a mining plan for High Pond Harbor, figuring, hell, if we're going to go into war with these guys, we better shut off their supplies. So we built a plan basically using run-in lines, IPs, and so forth, with names characteristic of the Great Northwest, Mount Baker, Olympic Peninsula, those kinds of things. Didn't know what to do with it, so we classified it top secret and turned it in and shoved it up the line, off plan 164. Never heard anything back. A few years ago, our skipper at the time, retired admiral now, Ty Dedman, reported to us at a reunion that he had access to some reports on that, and it turns out that the final mission that they did, where they mined Haiphong Harbor in 1972, was using essentially the same plan we presented in August of 1964. Now, Admiral Smith, you talk about stupid, there it was.
Thank you for that commentary. Appreciate it. That was stupid. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. My name is Clay Goring. I was with VQ-1 as an air crewman in 65 and 66, so we operated off the carriers down there. You mentioned rules of engagement, sir, and all the political situations, and Johnson and McNamara running the war from the White House. I was wondering if we have that same problem today with Iraq and Afghanistan and other places we operate.
Anybody want to try?
I didn't want to put anybody on the spot.
Oh, he's curious. During the Vietnam War, we had the political, very close handling by the politicians, LBJ and McNamara and so forth. Does that still exist today? Are our active duty counterparts, are they still being mishandled by senior politicians in terms of directing a war effort?
And also,
well, I've already had my taxes audited for the past 2 years.
I haven't paid my taxes.
There's an awful lot of direct White House involvement in targeting. In some of it, it should be, because if you're going to kill another human being with a drone, that probably takes something, that there are very few people who are going to be authorized to do that. But in the bombing operations that occurred against ISIS in the very early stages when we began getting involved, we were flying 2, 3, 7, or 8 sorties a day and considered that to be a pretty good deal. And the targets were coming right out of the White House. So there is direct involvement there. That may have shifted and changed a little bit now that they've kind of got their feet on the ground. But the fact of the matter is there is an awful lot of political direct involvement now. And I'm not sure in today's world you could get away without some very close day-to-day supervision, because it's a different war. It's a different world out there. I don't know. I know if I was in command, I wouldn't want that. Again, let me know what my mission is and then let me get on with it. But quite frankly, there's some people who have their hand in that process who are grossly unqualified to even be thinking about it, let alone making decisions about it.
Thank you, sir.
Good response, though. Thank you. Any other questions? Time for one more? None other? Okay, then, that wraps us up here, but how about from the audience? A round of applause to these great Americans here, the heroes from the air war over Vietnam.
In the bag.
Fun.
Thank you all for being here and participating. Let's have a great symposium.